I'm Roy from Roy's Garage. Today I'm going to be working on a 1999 Toyota Tacoma 2.4 liter automatic. I'm going to show you how to replace the front brake pads, calipers, rotors, grease front wheel bearings, and replace the front wheel bearing seals. These are the tools I'm going to be using today to do this job. A hood prop, rubber mallet, ball peen hammer, 1/2 inch impact, 14mm socket, 3/8 ratchet, 11mm socket, 17mm wrench, 8mm wrench, water pump plier, some side cutters, flat tip screwdriver, brass punch, Phoenix brake bleeder, dust cap remover, ceramic grease, suction ball, bottle of water with a hole on it, my bearing packer, and some wheel bearing grease. These are the parts I'm going to be using today to do this job. Front calipers, pads, wheel bearing seals, rotors, and dot 3 brake fluid. So I'm going to be loosening up my brake line. I'm going to be moving this tubing over to this side because this tubing is blocking the caliper bolt from coming out. And then we're going to be tightening it up. For now. Okay, so I'm going to be removing these 2 bolts and removing the caliper. Okay, so now we can remove the caliper. So I'm going to get a wire. I'm just going to tie it up so it won't hang or fall over. So remove these pads. So there's 2 bolts that mount the caliper to the spindle. We're going to be removing that. If you notice, the rotor is bolted to the back of the hub. So what we need to do is remove this whole hub assembly. So I'm going to be removing my dust cap. Remove some of this grease. So I'm going to be removing my cotter pin. Removing this spindle nut. And then removing this washer. Okay. And pulling out this hub. Okay, so I'm going to be removing the inner seal and the wheel bearing. So I'm going to be using a brass punch, kind of angle it. I'm going to be hitting the inner bearing, and then it's going to press out the seal. Right there. Okay. So when you knock the bearing out with this brass punch, it's going to look like this. You're going to be catching the inner part of the race and pounding it down to force the seal out. I'm going to be cleaning the inside of my hub, getting rid of all this old grease. So you got to kind of dig it out. Don't reuse it. Then just wipe the inside. Okay, so now I'm going to be unbolting the hub from the rotor. So there's 5 bolts, 14mm bolts. We're going to unbolt these. So you just got to get a hammer and just pound it. Pound your rotor down. It's gonna come off the hub. Okay, so I'm going to be bolting up my rotor to the hub. Okay, so I'm going to be putting some grease, wheel bearing grease in my hub. You don't have to fill it up. All you need to do is just coat it. That's more so it doesn't rust. So I'm going to be cleaning up my bearing. Just wiping off all the old grease. Okay, that should be good enough. So I have a bearing packer right here. What I'm gonna do is put this bearing in and I'm gonna flush it out. Flush out the old grease. Okay, you stick this guy here. Put this guy on here. Now I'm gonna stand on it. So you see all the old grease will come out. Get rid of this old grease. Put the bearing in the hub. Now I'm going to be installing my seal. I got a new rubber seal. Hammering it down. So I'm going to be cleaning up the old grease on my spindle. Putting some new grease on the spindle, just enough so it doesn't rust. So before I put this hub assembly on, I'm going to be cleaning my rotor with some brake clean, get off the oil. Now we can put this hub assembly on. So I'm going to be greasing up my outer bearing. Same thing, just clean it up. Putting in my bearing packer. So we're putting the outer bearing on. So I'm going to be cleaning up my washer. Okay, putting it on. Cleaning up my nut. So I cleaned up the nut. So I'm going to be putting it on my spindle. And this guy, you don't make it real tight, just snug. About there. Cleaning up my lock. Putting on my cotter pin. And bending this guy over. Okay, so my dust cap, clean out all that excess grease. And just put some fresh wheel bearing grease. All you need is a little just to coat it, just so it doesn't rust. So now we're going to be putting it on. Okay, this is the caliper that I'm going to be installing. So I'm going to be removing these two bolts and I'm going to be mounting the caliper mount first. Okay, so before I mount this, I'm going to be putting my shims on. There's these shims that came with the kit. Okay, so I'm going to be greasing up the shims. Putting some grease right in here. So now we're going to be mounting this. So we're putting on my pads. Put a little grease on the back of this pad. Just rub it around. Okay, so I'm going to be installing my caliper. So I'm going to be greasing it up. Put some grease on the piston. Okay. Be greasing up my pins. So I'm going to be transferring my brake lines to my caliper. Always use new washers. Okay, so now we're going to bleed the brakes. So before we flush out the brake system, I'm going to gravity bleed the system. So I'm going to be opening up my bleeder screw and just let gravity pump out the fluid. Now it's coming out. Give it a couple taps. In case there's any air bubbles in there, it's going to break it up. Got a lot of air in the system. Okay, so that looks good. So go lock it up. So I'm going to be removing my brake fluid from the master cylinder. There's a screen in here. Gotta remove it. So I'm going to be sucking out the old brake fluid. So I'm going to be flushing out the brake. I'm going to be opening up my bleeder screw, and I'm going to be pumping fresh fluid from the caliper up to the master. It takes about half a bottle per wheel. So we're going to be locking it up. So I'm going to be sucking out the fluid again. So I'm going to be filling up the master with some fresh brake fluid. Putting back the screen. Okay, so now we're going to bleed the brakes. So I'm going to be starting up the vehicle. So I'm going to be pumping my brake up and down, no more than halfway. So now we're going to be pressurizing the brake system. I'm going to be using my hood prop, one against the brake pedal and one against the seat. So I'm going to be opening up my bleeder screw. Doing it one more time. I'm going to be pressurizing my brake system again. Now I'm going to be opening up my bleeder screw again. So that looks good. There's no air in it. So just lock it up. So I'm going to be shooting some water. Brake fluid is water soluble. Blowing it down with air. So now I'm going to pressurize the system again and check for leaks. We're going to be holding it for about 15-20 seconds and we're going to be checking for leaks. So we've been pressurizing for about 15-20 seconds. We're checking for leaks. No leaks, everything looks dry. You're good to go. So that's how you replace front pads, calipers, rotors, grease front wheel bearings, install new front wheel bearing seals. If you have any questions, comment below. Make sure you subscribe, give me the thumbs up, and I see you in the next video. Aloha.